Good morning.
So, yes, I'm Torgny Roxå. I come from Lund University in Sweden, very south end of Sweden. Anyone here been to Lund in Sweden? Hand up. One. Okay. So I will be a unique experience for you then. Well, maybe I should present myself a little bit more first. My first degree was during the 80s, a bachelor in literature and sociology. And I still read a lot of novels. I would not go into that because after my bachelor, I started to work in what we call in Sweden academic development, which is the same as educational development, or if you're from North America, it's sometimes called staff development. But it all has to do with how do you improve teaching and learning at university. So I've been doing that since 1988. And I realized quite quickly that me as an educational developer cannot develop any teaching whatsoever. The only people that can develop teaching are the teachers. So that means that if teaching is to be improved, somehow the teacher in question need to come to a conclusion that this I need to change. I would like to change this. So my job as an educational developer then is to figure out how can we influence academics to want to develop their own teaching. And this is interesting because academics, as you know, because I just assume that most of you are academics, are trained to think critically about things, to come up with counter-arguments, to defend whatever position you have decided to take on issues. And in that kind of environment, I'm employed to influence the system. To give you a contrast, I can say that really a long time ago, I worked for a couple of years in the Swedish Army, because my father was an army officer, and I grew up in that environment. And in the army, I remember they just told us that today we're going to do this instead of this. And from this very instant, everything new happened, which is super fascinating when it comes to university. You can consider the idea that if the rector would put up a list of 10 things to change at the university, and what would be the reaction from the academics? My guess is they wouldn't even notice it. And if they did, they would probably laugh a little bit about it and think, what is going on now? Why this? Because the environment is so different. And that's what I like. That's why I'm stuck at university. That's what I love to be an academic. And that's why I put up protect its soul around academics, around universities, because I think universities are fantastic places. And in the environment we live in, where things happen quite quickly, I love to be in a place where it is somewhat more slower and more reflective and more deliberate. But of course there are downsides to that. So we're going to get into that a little bit. Just something about Lund University, where I come from. And I particularly work at the Faculty of Engineering. And you can see the size of it there. It's like a small-sized university, probably. A lot of people. These are engineers that I work with now for so many years. I almost sort of become an engineer sometimes, even though I can't do the math they are doing. But they have a science epistemology to everything. Because as you know, the first discipline we are sort of grown up with at university forms some kind of epistemological sort of foundation for how we then view the world. That's why academics, when we meet, often start to tell each other, what is my first degree? What were you from the beginning? So even though you now know that I was a literature person sort of, well, in 1985, that was a long time ago. I still think it is really important to tell you that. So there is a timeline running through everything we do at university. So how do you change that? So I told my boss that I'm going to come here and I'm going to talk for 30 minutes and tell you how to change a university. And he said to me, are you going to talk about how to change a university in 30 minutes? Or are you going to talk for 30 minutes about how to change the university? And of course, it's the latter. But it's quite easy. I can do this in just 12 seconds. And here it is. And Gabriella already talked about ways of doing this. You change the university by getting people to talk more to each other and in better ways. It's really important to think both. It's not just casual conversations. It's also improving those conversations. And what do I mean by improving? It goes back to the deliberate conversations you have in your own disciplines. It is being somewhat careful with the perspective you pick, through which you see things. You use a couple of references, because we all know references are really good to attach ourselves to others' thinking. Sometimes we also make explicit the theoretical perspective we use. And of course, in teaching and learning, there are many perspectives around. So what we tell our teachers is to choose one that fits you, but you need something. You need something to be scholarly. You can't just have an opinion. So this would be the slogan coming out of this. It's no longer allowed. I mean, you can't ban anything at university, which is really good. But it's not enough to just have an opinion about your teaching. You need to back it up somehow. You don't need to become an educational researcher. We have professionals for that. I mean, they do that kind of stuff. But since we all are teachers in a university, we should be able to become scholarly about our own teaching. Yeah, so what about conversations then? So here is a question for you then. So you're probably biased. I just assume you're all biased because you're here today. So you're probably interested in teaching and learning. Maybe one or two of you are negative towards teaching and learning, and you are here to check out what the weird people are actually doing. But what I would assume is that most of you are interested in this. But I still would like to ask, how many people do you really talk to about your teaching? And really, about problems, about successes, about an idea you just got, but you want to test it on someone before you put it into practice. That kind of conversation. So I give you now 15 seconds to sum up in your head, how many people do you talk to about teaching and learning? Okay. This is not a scientific investigation, so you don't have to be super careful, but it gives an indication. So I would like you to raise the hand now if you have more than 10. And you can look around now. There are a few people here. How many of you have between 5 and 9? Hand up. A group of people. 2 to 5? 2 to 5, who would that be? Yeah, you see a spread here. So what we, Katarina and Mortensson and myself did was to publish this in 2009, and we came up with 4 ± 2 regular academics, not weird people like you coming to teaching and learning conferences, even though you're also regular academics, of course. This has then been replicated in many studies, so it seems to become like that. What happens here is that we can draw a graphic representation of the teaching and learning culture at universities. And this is just sort of a way of doing it. This is not a depiction of the reality. It's just a way of illustrating my point. So you can see 3 red teachers here, naturally we picked stars. So they are academic teachers, and they have a few significant interactions. Because that's what we call these interactions that I was talking about, significant interaction. You probably have many more interactions. You talk to many people, but a few of them mean more to you. Those are the ones that you allow yourself to be influenced by. Those are the significant others. But it also means that at the university, this is where the reality is constructed through these conversations. So whatever happens in those conversations define the educational reality at a university. Because educational reality is a social reality, and this is where it is constructed. So if we want to change that kind of educational reality at the university, we have to come into these and influence them. And you can't do that by brute force. If you come into two academics talking to each other and you tell them, you're not allowed to talk about this, you have to talk about this, that will not work. That will be a minus. They will probably be angry. So somehow this has to happen anyway. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. They don't care about organizational boundaries. Some of you here might have a significant other in another university in the world somewhere. We have one teacher in our place, he teaches computer science, and he told us, I would never talk to my colleagues here in Lund. I have 2 colleagues at MIT with whom I talk about teaching. That's a good illustration. So university sort of organizational boundaries doesn't count much in these kind of networks. And here are a few names that have sort of added to this knowledge. And it is today quite a substantial amount of knowledge around these significant conversations and the value of conversations, right? Yeah. So these networks then become something important. And from Granovetter, this is already 1973, a very important publication, we know that these kinds of partition networks, so what you see here are individuals linked to each other, but you can see there are like islands here. They don't link up. This is what Granovetter calls a partitioned network. And they are very vulnerable because they cannot coordinate themselves. It's like silos in the university. They don't talk to each other. While over there you see an integrated network, which are also called evolved, because you can actually evolve this into that. I just use these pictures to illustrate my point. They are in fact from a publication about student networks. And over there you can see the student network in a cohort before the pandemic. And this is the same cohort during the pandemic. And you can compare that to your own experience of the pandemic time. And what probably comes up, at least for the students, is that before the pandemic, you met a lot of strange people, a lot of different kinds of people. While during the pandemic, they say, I'm just studying with my study group, and those are the only ones I meet. So the one thing the pandemic forced us to do was to move into an era of partitioned networks. Gladly now, we are not really, my wife is a science journalist in the health area, so she tells me repeatedly, remember now, we're not out of the pandemic, we're not out of the pandemic. And I say, yeah, but I'm going to meet people, I'm going to meet people. Yeah, and that's what we talk about during breakfast at home. So when I said in the beginning, how do you influence the university without sort of losing the soul of the university? It is in fact more problematic not doing anything. Because not doing anything at universities are usually end up with this kind of networks. And those are much more fragile to any kind of political or other forces interventions into universities. That kind of network over there is much more resilient. So even though my title was, how can you evolve, how can you develop a university without losing its soul, it might also be, how can you develop your university so that you can withstand external influence, so that you become more a university, even though the world around us are changing. because it is changing, as you know. So this is what we want. So we studied good places then, Katarina and I. We went around in our universities and did sort of ethnographically inspired sort of study of good places. And we find that kind of networks in all those places. These networks that we looked at, the strong ones, are also really interested in what goes on beyond our network, oriented in the world. And that goes for students as well. There is a fantastic publication. Oh, it should be an 8 there, so sorry about that. It should be 2018. By Rientes and others, showing that student study groups that are oriented outside themselves, like this. Oriented means interested in what happens around us, do better than student network study groups that are more internal in their sort of perception of things. And this seems to be the same with academics. You know, students are people, so that is fair to sort of compare them to academics, I think, because I do think that academics are also people. So they follow sort of some similar patterns here. It's also really good, I would say, in terms of resilience, if these people in the network are already pursuing a development on their own, believing in something. This is what we want to do. This is what we want to do better. It doesn't matter much what that is. The more important thing is that there is a direction. That seems to be really important. And everything can be influenced by merely support good conversations, like this conference. So here are things that we've done at LTH, where I work then. But you see, there are more or less the same things as Gabriela talked about. This is not rocket science. It's not about inventing the perfect way of doing it. It's more about long-term hard work, a sort of low science thing that we can all understand. So we have pedagogical courses for teachers, really popular pedagogical courses. We have an evidence-based course evaluation system that do not ask about opinions, but instead ask about things that we know are important in courses. We can talk about that later on if any one of you are interested in that. We also involve students in this. So all the course evaluations are interpreted. All the results from those are interpreted in conversations between the teacher, a program coordinator, and 2 students. So we have hundreds of those conversations going on every year. And we have a reward system for teaching, for excellence in teaching, which we think is fair since there are a whole lot of rewards around for researchers. So what we tried to do was just to mirror that a little bit. So we have a research title in Sweden called docent. It's a strange title since docent comes from docere and means sort of teaching, but in fact it's evolved into becoming just a research title. So now we also have a title for a little bit better teacher. And we have about 100 of them. We had that system now for 20 years. Yeah, we naturally have a campus conference. We have a newsletter about teaching and learning, database and good example. You see the things that Gabriela talked about. Those are available. Those ideas are available globally. You know, everybody today sign up to these activities. So Gabriela told you about a database. I'm going to show you about our database then, if I can do that. So here it is. And you can learn Swedish also, since we somehow translated the text but not the title. But you probably can recognize now project. Yeah, that's projects, right? Konferensrapporter, conference reports. Now you can speak a little bit Swedish. So this is searchable. In this, we have about 600 texts. Teachers in engineering talking to other teachers in engineering. I'm going to show you a sample of what they write. So we can search. I'll put in lecture here, since that is usually what we do. And here we have all these blue ones are texts by academics in engineering for other academics in engineering. And you might find some of them applicable, at least as titles, to your own teaching. Yeah. Engaging and maintaining students' interest during lectures. What do you say about that? I mean, that must be one of the most global, interesting questions ever for academics. And there are a bunch of ways of doing this. What we love this to be is that when the teachers in engineering write to each other, they write in times 10 points in 2 columns with graphs and numbers and tables in them, because that's how engineers write to other engineers. So they recognize that. When this was transformed into humanities, that became impossible to do. I mean, they cannot write only 1,300 words. I think humanities people, when you put on the computer, there comes out sort of 1,300 words before you even hit the keyboard. So they write 4,000 words and double spacing, because that's what humanities people do. So you see, the problem, the thing here is that they are graphically similar to what I'm used to. The only difference is that now they are about teaching. And the best paper we have in here is in Swedish, but it's about, can I trust peer feedback among students? It's a teacher, Anna Axelsson, in computer science, and she teaches a lot of programming. I mean, they teach those people doing the software that we have in our computers, so she teaches these people. And what they do when they teach programming is that students write bits of code, you know, some lines like that, and then the teacher has to give feedback on that. And if you have a student group of 100, and your course consists of 10 of those pieces of code, that means that this teacher have to give feedback on 1,000 pieces of code during a course. And naturally, they think about, are there other ways to do this? So what about assembling the students in a room like this, all 100 of them? You put them in groups of 4, so there are 2 pairs around each table, and 1 pair give the other 2 students their pieces of code, and they give them 2 pieces of code, and then they work on them for 30 minutes with the help of some criteria that Anna Axelsson puts up here. And then after 30 minutes, they exchange back, read the feedback they got from the others, ask questions, have a conversation about that, and then they leave the room. It takes Anna about 90 minutes to provide feedback for 100 students on this piece of code that she has to do. But the question, of course, is, does it work? What is the quality of this feedback? So what she did at one occasion was to gather a copy of all the pieces of code and then gather a copy of all feedback that was given between students. After that, she read the pieces of code herself and wrote feedback on them and compared to what students have written to each other. And she found about sort of 85, it is all numbers in engineering, so it's about 85% overlap in this. And considering the amount of feedback that is provided in 90 minutes, plus the positive effect, as you know, of giving someone feedback, you know how much learning it is included in that. So she came up to the conclusion, yes, you can trust that. It works fine for me. And we just deliver this paper around at the faculty, and everybody is inspired by it, including the 1,300 words and 10 and 2 tables, you know, all the engineering way of doing it. So again, as I say, there is definitely no rocket science in this. So these are things we've been doing for a long time, but they are based in the same principle that I just showed you. And does it work? I just put this up for you. So we collected information about our courses in 2003. So each column here is a year, an academic year. So we check for good teaching, what we call good teaching, clear goals. That means, do students understand the goal of the courses? Good assessment, does the assessment test understanding versus sort of memorization? General skills and overall satisfaction, that is just one question. And what I wanted to show you here with a sample of 250,000 questionnaires, it does become better. So it's hopeful. I mean, we know how to do these things. And with we, I mean we globally know how to influence academics towards better teaching by demanding them to talk to more people and in better ways, but allowing them to talk about whatever they find meaningful. Not pushing sort of topics onto them, but inviting them to talk about whatever they find is interesting. And the 600 pages reports that we have in our database, I tell you, they are about everything you could possibly imagine about teaching engineering. I mean, anything is in there, because we allow them to talk about whatever they find meaningful, and if they do that, that's fine, because we know it becomes better. And yeah, that was my... Oh, that's Comenius again. So, thank you very much. That was my speech for today. You're so far away, but thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much for this brilliant presentation with plenty of great thoughts. Could you please go back to the last chart, because I was quite impressed by the chart, because this is a wow result for the university or for the faculty, yes. Was it an evidence-based questionnaire that you used? That's the first question. And the second question is, there is a lot of stuff at the faculty. So, and some staff are fans of innovations, some are not. So despite this mixture in opinions to innovations, you still were able to make this progress. Is that right? So how did you cope with those who were not the fans of innovation?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Oh, thank you. This is fantastic. Do we have an hour? No, we don't have an hour. We don't have an hour. So yes, it is an evidence-based questionnaire. It's called Course Experience Questionnaire, and it's developed by an Australian called Paul Ramsden during the 90s. And it's been researched up and down, inside out for many, many years. I mean, there are both statistical analysis, the content analysis, and also use of it. So these are one of the questionnaires that are actually established for checking interesting things. What we are proud about in this questionnaire is that it checks basically what it tries to do, because these are, yeah, we don't have to go into that. What it tries to do is to check whether courses are supporting students' understanding versus student memorization. Because we like understanding. I bet most of you do like understanding as well. So we choose a questionnaire that could actually tell us something about, is this course a course that encourages understanding? And the teachers like that. It goes together with a sort of academic mindset. So yes, there is a longitudinal development here. It's almost linear, the engineers tell me. I'm not even capable of saying whether they are linear or not, but that's what they say, and they can do numbers. You know, there are many things to say about this. First of all, development seems to happen in teaching that. Seems to happen mostly in very small steps. Teachers changing a little bit every year. So they tweak a little bit. So when we ask them, we've done that too, we asked them in focus groups, what did you do with your course last year? They say then immediately, oh, I didn't know anything, and it was the same, okay, we said, but we can see overall that things are improving, so why could that be in your course? You know, I reallocated resources, they say. I put up a questionnaire in Canvas so that I can release a couple of teaching assistants to talk to students about their subject, right? Aha, we said, so that is a change. Yeah, that's what I did. But you see, if you do these small things over time in great numbers, it becomes measurable. So we do not think necessarily that university teaching develops in grand projects. Sometimes they do, sometimes those projects fail, sometimes they succeed. But we say that most academics tweak their course a little bit every year. And that is what you see over here. Of course, we have teachers who do not care about this. I call them minus teachers, because they seem to be against everything that we talk about. Then we have the pluses. I mean, the pluses are those developing teaching, even though we would sort of punish them for it, they would develop teaching, because they can't help themselves. They will always develop. And then we have the plus minus. They don't say anything. But if there was a vote, they would vote for pluses. And then we have the minus pluses, right? So you have these four groups. 2 categories are talking, 2 categories are quiet. And the quiet group is the largest group. So what we really put an effort into is to engage the plus minus and minus pluses in the conversation. Because as soon as they start to talk, a whole bunch of things emerges that you haven't thought about. The minus and pluses, they have talked to each other endlessly, and they throw their hobby horses around, and there is nothing new in that. But as soon as you get a plus minus to say something, you realize, oh my God, I didn't think about that. So that's what we do. The minus will always be there. We have, after 20 years, we have accepted that they will not change. They ask the same questions, say the same things. But on the other hand, they believe in something which is different. And since we're a university, it is really good to know that we have a group of people that believe in something very different. Because that's what we do at universities. We need those people, so we shouldn't sort of focus on them. We should just allow them to be there and listen when they talk, and then go around doing the business that we believe in. And after all, the minus people, they call me the biggest minus people. Because I'm for something they are against. So this is something that happens at universities all the time. Don't forget your minus people. They say important things occasionally.
Thank you so much, Torgny. Thanks to everyone. And you are all now invited for a coffee break in our atrium. And please, after 15 minutes, be so kind to choose one of the panels and meet the presenters in their rooms. Thank you so much again.